Gomer. The whole entire message of the book breaks down if somehow Hosea is now dealing with another relationship. God has used this on purpose to be a mirror with His people, and so there is no other. He has to go back to Gomer, and guess what? She's not at home. She's not with him. He says, he gets the instruction, go, and verse 2, he says, so I bought her for 15 shekels of silver and a homer and a lethek of barley. And I said to her, you must dwell as mine for many days. You shall not play the whore or belong to another man. So will I also be to you. So do you see in the storyline, we don't have all the details, and let's be clear, I don't want to fill in things that I don't know for sure, but somehow she's not at home. She's with another man. Any married man in here should feel some sense of indignation when you hear that phrase, another man. Are you kidding me? But Hosea's seen it before. And now the instruction is go get her again. Keep pursuing. Keep loving. And he goes, and guess what? She thought she was getting something from these lovers. She was after another to somehow fulfill her or provide for her. But where do we find her? We find her in a situation where he has to buy her back. It's going to cost him. So it says, so I bought her. There's much that's unclear about that. We don't know why there's a price. Maybe it's just his way of helping this guy say, man, just let me have her back. Maybe it's just sort of a kind of a bribe, so to speak. Maybe more likely it's a payment because he owns her now. There's one commentator who says this to make it clear. One possibility, and perhaps the most likely, is that it denotes the legal transfer of a person from one sphere of authority to another. What does it mean? When he says he bought her, it means this. Legal transfer of a person from one sphere of authority to another. I gained possession of her. I gained the legal recognition that she was mine. The general sense is well caught. He says with words denoting ransom or redemption. He goes on to say, the nature of the financial transaction is unfortunately far from clear. But he does say that at least it suggests that Gomer's infidelities had eventually betrayed her into a liaison from whose financial domestic implications she could not readily escape. What we know is that for one reason or another, her activities have got her caught and she cannot escape. There are domestic and financial things now that weigh over her. And if Hosea wants her back, he must buy her back. So, whether she's a slave or a concubine, or maybe in today's language, we would even say she ended up in the dark or heavy control of a pimp. He owns her. He's using her for his gain. And Hosea, through all of this, is not told, go get her back and bring her home and put her in some side room to where she feels guilt and she's put in her place. Go love her. He's told to go back with his heart. Pierced as though it may be, go love her again and again. Do you hear it? You know that this is a grave warning about how sin works, by the way. You cheat on God thinking some other thing is going to be fun or exciting, or it's going to fulfill you somehow, or make you feel loved. And instead, not only have you incurred guilt for breaking the covenant with God, but the one you thought loved you ends up owning you and using you and driving you deeper into complicated web of shame and consequences and misplaced desire. That's how sin works. And we should take a clue from Gomer's activities. When we think that sin is drawing us and alluring us, we should say, you know where this ends. This ends in your slavery. This ends in you being bound and caught up, and you won't be able to escape. But for someone to come and buy you out and redeem you. Now, as Christians, I believe at this point we should say, praise God for the redeeming work of Jesus Christ on the cross. Amen? Because this redemption, this picture here of the buying back, although it may not be a one-for-one comparison, at least it echoes of the thing that God said He would do for us when He said, I'm going to buy you out of your slavery. I'm coming for you. I will pay the price, whatever it may be. And His blood shed was necessary to pay your debt. If you were ever to have any hope of coming home and being redeemed and reconciled back into a relationship with the one who loves you. That's what Jesus has done for us. And we see that reflected in the activities here in the life of Hosea and Gomer. So, as we recall all of this narrative of Hosea and Gomer, what do we learn? And I want to draw out a couple of things, and one of them I want to put in front of you. Besides the activity of sin in your life and the warning that we all need to hear, that it crouches at the door and it wants to have you, but you must master it, as was said in Genesis. We also learn, if we're paying attention, we see Hosea's obedience. Did you see how it went down? Go again, love a woman, so I went and I bought her. Hosea is unreservedly obedient to his God. As hard as it may be, he went and did as he was told. And so for us, we should recognize that obedience and question for ourselves, what does my obedience of you, God, look like? Am I unquestioning of you when it seems hard or when it's going to take me down a road I'm not sure I want to walk? Will I do what you tell me to do? And I want to give 4 ways that sometimes we respond to commands of God. And I hope that ultimately we will find ourselves only living in the last. There's 4 ways we would be potentially disobedient. When God gives a command, we can just say, no, I don't want to. That seems too hard or too difficult. I think of Jonah, right? Hey, I want you to go and preach to the people of Nineveh. And what does he do? He says, no. I'm going the other way, God. I see it differently than you. You don't know how bad those people are. You don't know how little they deserve your grace and mercy. And I'm afraid that if I preach to them, they're actually going to repent. And so he says, I'm going the other way. So Jonah's response was a response of disobedience to the command of God. And then even after his whole ordeal, the whale and God and all of that he did, his obedience, the second thing we could see and we could call it disingenuous. Now not only is he doing what he was told, but he's doing it begrudgingly. Okay, God, if I have to, I'll just get this done. But his heart wasn't in it. And so I ask us, when God gives us instruction and leadership and guidance and commands, do we disobey? Maybe not. Maybe we just go ahead and obey, but we do it in a disingenuine, grumbling, less than heartfelt way. Or a third possibility of how we respond to God's command might be delayed. Okay, God, I'll do it later. I know you're asking this of me, but not now. And you might recall in the New Testament as Jesus was telling people, hey, come follow me. And some people would say, well, hold on. I need to bury my father and I have some family business to attend to. Well, hold on. I'm actually over here working on this purchase. And until it's complete and I've got all my affairs in order, then. And Jesus lets them know that's not what I'm looking for. I said, come follow me. Which leads to the fourth possibility. You could be disobedient, you could be disingenuous, you could be delayed, or done. Just call it done, Lord. If you say it, I will do it. And that's what we see in many examples in the Bible. But I think of the contrast of those that Jesus called and said, I have other things to do, and his 12. Come follow me, I will make you fishers of men. They dropped their nets immediately and they followed him. You see, the obedience was just done. And that's what I see here in Hosea. God said to do this thing, go back for your wife and get her, and he does. And it was costly. Now, we could do some math and try and figure out how much he paid for her. I find it interesting that he used some silver and some barley. It makes it seem as if maybe he didn't have the cash on hand. And you know what? When you start getting into the details, it really wasn't very much. 15 shekels of silver, a homer and a lethek of barley. If I tried to add it up with today's prices, maybe $150. Depends, again, who knows, right? But here it is. Here's Hosea, and he's saying, I don't even have the cash to get you, but I'm coming anyway, and I'll do whatever it takes. Here's all of my money and everything else I can muster up to get you free, and he's willing to pay the price in his obedience. It's pretty amazing. So we see obedience. We learn obedience from Hosea. We also see love. Can we learn from this kind of love? Can we learn from this kind of forgiveness, this kind of open arms that says, I want you with me, we're made to be together, no matter what, let's move forward. And so it's again, and it's Gomer, and he pursues. But we also learn what one writer called, and he thinks of these as the darkest moments of Hosea's life. Think of where he had to go. It says, go get her. That means get up. There's activity. You must be on the rescue mission. You can't just stay where you are. Go get her. And where does he have to go? Does he want to go knock on that man's door? Is she in the red light district? Where does he have to go? What muck, what ugliness? That's not the part of town where the prophet of God should be hanging out. It's embarrassing. His reputation is on the line, and yet here he goes once again after his promiscuous wife. So he goes through pain. It's not to say that if you're going to follow God, everything's going to be easy and without pain. No. In fact, there's a great deal of pain. And if we resist that in our own lives, we have only to look at our Savior and know that God did not shield himself from the deepest of wounds. He did not shield his heart and say, no, I'm God of the universe. I don't have to feel like that, so I don't have to put up with you. Instead, he loved us and he made us and he gave us the choice to love him back, and we did not. And he went through the pain. The pain of the redeeming work that was necessary. He walked that hard road. So as we look at Hosea and Gomer and we retell the story and recognize how real that was for him, again, one commentator says this, the words are reasonably clear. Hosea is commanded to go again, love a woman. He is to renew his efforts to show the caring love of a husband towards his wife, who is characterized as a woman at present in an adulterous relationship. That she is adulterous indicates clearly that she was properly married. There cannot be adultery except where a man's wife is involved. And so the story is very clear. That's what we see and hear and understand from Hosea. And he brings her home and he says, you must dwell as mine for many days. You shall not play the whore or belong to another man. So will I also be to you. I have to admit I had some trouble understanding what exactly is going on here. I get the idea that he's saying, I don't want you doing that anymore, wife, please. No more running around. You must stay with me. And I thought maybe we saw a picture of faithfulness as he says, so will I also be to you. But as I read on this week, I learned a little more, and I've become convinced that maybe there's a little more to it than just him saying, well, I'll be faithful to you, which he will, that's part of it. But in fact, he's saying, no more connecting with others for you, and I also will refrain from connecting with you for a time. There's a process that he's initiating here where he says, as you come home, we're going to wean you off of this stuff over here, and we are going to have a time of restoration and separation. And God uses that in their life to bring about the healing in the relationship that's needed. Now hold on to that, because I think if you take that understanding as we come back around and look at the people of Israel, this will be demonstrative of what God is doing in them. So let's move on to that second look at this then. Let's talk about God and Israel. Now, it's very purposeful that this is parallel and symbolic. Look at verse 1. He says, go again, love a woman who's loved by another man and is an adulteress, even as, and there it is, because I'm making a connection just in the same way, even as the Lord loves the children of Israel, though they turn to other gods and love cakes of raisins. And then in verse 3 and 4, Hosea says to his wife what he says, you must dwell as mine for many days. And then verse 4, or because, why should all this be in Hosea's circumstances? Because the children of Israel shall dwell many days, without king or prince, without sacrifice or pillar, without ephod or household gods. So you see, it's on purpose that there are parallels. The wording is parallel. It says love. Love your wife. Why? Because the Lord loves Israel. There's a parallel there. It says, though they turn to other gods. It's the same as her adultery. When you turn to other things, it's the same. It's parallel. There's symbolism. That's spiritual adultery. We've talked about that. And then, as there's a returning, there's a process of restoration and separation that the Lord has ordained for the people of Israel. He says, you need to do it this way, Hosea, when you bring her home, because what I'm going to do is I'm going to make sure that the children of Israel shall dwell many days, and there's a parallel again, the same wording, many days, without king or prince, without sacrifice or pillar, without ephod or household gods. So once again, as we look at these parallels, we see go. We see the rescue mission of God. We see Him saying, I'm going to stir myself up and out of what I'm doing in order to come to you. That's how salvation works. If you think that salvation is a matter of us getting ourselves all fixed up and cleaned up and coming to God, you've got it backwards. God came after you. Amen? And God shows it because He was pursuing His people, Israel, at this time. We see love paralleled. God is love. We learn that from the New Testament. 1 John makes it clear. God is love, and guess what? We love because He first loved us. As wayward people with wandering hearts, if we are ever to understand and figure out how to love and how to love God back, we must recognize that God came after us with His love. He pursued us with His love. Some of you need to let that wash over you. You need to let the love of God just wash over you. Maybe you think of yourself lowly, full of sin and shame. He's pursuing you with His love. Let God speak His love to you this morning. Let that wash over your history and your things and your stuff. And let God's love just wash over your heart this morning. He loved Israel. Do you want to know what Israel was like? I'm going to turn to 2 Kings chapter 17. You might turn there with me. Because if we want to remember what exactly was going on here, we find a perfect description of it. This is a historical representation of the people of the northern tribes of Israel at that time before they fell when Assyria came and took over Samaria and sent them off in exile. 2 Kings chapter 17. I'm going to read a bunch of it because here's what you're here listening for. You're listening for who were these people? What were they doing exactly? Why is God so upset? What's the issue? Well, here it is chronicled for you. 2 Kings chapter 17, verse 6. In the 9th year of Hosea, the king of Assyria captured Samaria. And he carried the Israelites away to Assyria and placed them in Halah and on the Habor, the river of Gozan, and in the cities of the Medes. And this occurred, here it is, because, a word that's a key word in Hosea. So many times he's saying, why is this happening? Because, you want to know why? Because the people of Israel had sinned against the Lord their God, who had brought them up out of the land of Egypt, from under the hand of Pharaoh, king of Egypt, and had feared other gods, and walked in the customs of the nations, whom the Lord drove out before the people of Israel, and in the customs that the kings of Israel had practiced. And the people of Israel did secretly against the Lord, their God, things that were not right. They built for themselves high places in all their towns, from watchtower to fortified city. They set up for themselves pillars and Asherim on every high hill and under every green tree. And there they made offerings on all the high places, as the nations did, whom the Lord carried away from before them. And they did wicked things, provoking the Lord to anger. And they served idols, of which the Lord had said to them, "You shall not do this." Yet the Lord warned Israel and Judah by every prophet and every seer, saying, "Turn from your evil ways and keep my commandments and my statutes in accordance with all the law that I commanded your fathers and that I sent you by my servants, the prophets." But they would not listen, but were stubborn as their fathers had been, who did not believe in the Lord their God. They despised his statutes and his covenant that he made with their fathers and the warnings that he gave them. They went after false idols and became false. They followed the nations that were around them, concerning whom the Lord had commanded them that they should not do like them. And they abandoned all the commandments of the Lord their God and made for themselves metal images of 2 calves. And they made an Asherah and worshipped all the host of heaven and served Baal. And they burned their sons and their daughters as offerings and used divination and omens and sold themselves to do evil in the sight of the Lord, provoking him to anger. Therefore the Lord was very angry with Israel and removed them out of his sight. None was left but the tribe of Judah only. Judah also did not keep the commandments of the Lord their God, but walked in the customs that Israel introduced. And the Lord rejected all the descendants of Israel and afflicted them and gave them into the hand of plunderers until he had cast them out of his sight. When he had torn Israel from the house of David, they made Jeroboam son of Nebat king. And Jeroboam drove Israel from following the Lord and made them commit great sin. The people of Israel walked in all the sins that Jeroboam did. They did not depart from them until the Lord removed Israel out of his sight, as he had spoken by all his servants and prophets. So Israel was exiled from their own land to Assyria until this day. I know that's a chunk, but do you hear? God is saying there's a because. For years and years and years, you have been running and worshiping everything. It's not just one God, it's all of them. You are burning your sons and daughters in fires to some God. You are doing the things that I warned you not to do. And what happened? Israel was exiled from their own land to Assyria. And it's this exile that I believe God was working in to this prophecy of Hosea in chapter 3, when he says, "They shall dwell many days without king or prince, without sacrifice or pillar, without ephod or household gods." He's saying the children of Israel, for a time, they will be sent away, and all of the systems that they were leaning on. If you were leaning on your king and you thought the king would save us, he'll be done and gone, no more. If you were thinking the princes, the leaders, the military leaders, all of those, if you were hoping something out of them, they'll be done and gone. If you thought that your worship, however blended, and you got to notice here, there's Jewish forms mentioned and there are pagan forms mentioned, and it's as if they've got so habitualized in worshiping everything in sight That now there's no way to even tell where Jewish worship according to the law started and ended and where the worship of other gods blended in. It was so blended. He says, no more sacrifice or pillar. They were called to do sacrifices, certain kinds. They weren't called to sacrifice their children. They were called to set up pillars as reminders, but guess what? They were setting up pillars for other gods and other names. They were called to wear the ephod, this special presentation, the special robe that had this special way relating to God. And you know what? They put it on and did it their own way. You're wearing God's thing and doing God's thing while at the same time you've got little miniature gods at home. Am I making sense? So here it is, and God says, away with all of it. I'm calling you home, but the way I'm doing that is I'm sending you away. There's going to be a time of separation. There's going to be a time in which there's purification going on through judgment. And so in their season for many days, not in their homeland, not leaning on their kings, no longer having the structures of their religious activities, God was preparing them for the return of their hearts. God was preparing them through that time. So they were hopelessly syncretistic, we could say. They were blending it all. And now it's all gone. That's what Hosea was saying. It's coming. The children of Israel shall soon dwell many days without all these things. So one commentary says this: in the typology of presentation, Israel is separated from God as a result of its sinfulness and will be restored after a period of judgment and purification. As a consequence, it will exist for a time without the political status of a sovereign people. This is a form of self-incurred punishment that functions also as a period of purification. So you see, there are consequences. There are hard things yet to come. Yes, God is calling them home. Yes, God wants to win their heart, and He's going to woo them and call them. But there are things yet to be done. There are difficulties yet to overcome. There are consequences yet to be played out. And the exile is going to happen. But to what end? Read with me verse 5. Afterward. And this is undesignated, kind of a future-oriented, but we're not sure when. Afterward, the children of Israel. And remember, children of Israel aligns with Gomer in our story. And Gomer aligns with the children of Israel. And the children of Israel, through Christ, we become the circumcision. We are brought into this family and these promises. And so it's saying, the children of Israel shall return and seek the Lord their God, and David their king. And they shall come in fear to the Lord and to His goodness in the latter days. So I come to our third section, speaking about God and His people more broadly. And what do we see coming out of this passage? We see three things, and it's in the title of my sermon. We see pursuit, we see purification, and we see promise. He is pursuing, He will be purifying, and there is yet a promise that remains. Now, pursuit. You've heard me describing the story of Hosea. You've heard me explaining God's plan in that day and in that time. This exile happened, historical truth. 722 BC, Samaria fell. So God did execute upon His plan, and in that was evidence of God's pursuit of His people. And so we see in history that God was going to hold out for Himself a remnant. There would be a time where He would gather together His people. I will be their God and they will be my people, right? So there's pursuit. And He pursues us with His love. His desire is to know us. We talked already about redemption, how He bought her. And Paul reminded the Corinthians, you were bought with a price. So glorify God with your body. There's a resulting reaction when we realize the price that was paid for us. And now is probably as good a time as any to think about where would we be if He didn't. Think about that with me for a second. I've been talking about his pursuit as if it's just the thing that had to happen. But Hosea, what if he didn't go get Gomer? Where would she be? Caught. Hopelessly wishing and waiting for something to fulfill her, and in the same cycles. She would be owned. She would be under the slavery of the result of her own sin. She would be living in that part of town with no chance or hope of getting out, being used for the gain of somebody else. Now, what if God did not pursue us? Where would we be left? We would be caught in the cycles of sin, no hope to get out. Sin would have our number, it would own us. And in all the darkness of that, all the shame, there we would be, left. But God did. He pursued us. Now, at this point, I think it's helpful to think about your own testimony. What has God done to win you over? If you are a believer in Jesus Christ, that means at some point you have said, "Yes, Lord, I see what you've done for me on the cross. I receive by faith the gift of life that you're offering, and I do it through my own repentance. I agree with you about who I am. I am that whore. I am that sinner. I am that one who has run around with anything and everything else except for you." And when we received from Him the new life that is only offered through Jesus Christ, a story began in our lives. But think about your own story. How did you get to that point? What did God do to pursue you? Who did He send your way? What circumstances did He arrange just so? What truths did He put right in front of you that you just had to encounter? Everyone has a testimony. And I'd love to share a number of them, but there's a couple that came out in the opening chapter of a book by John Stott called Why I Am a Christian. He's contemplating the pursuit that God had in His own life and how He came to this point. And he characterizes God's work in His own life as a series of persistent events that he likens to Christ persistently knocking at the door of his life. And as he considers this concept, he recalls and he retells similar experiences of others who ended up yielding and putting their faith in Jesus. Among them is a man named Francis Thompson. Francis Thompson you may or may not have heard of, but he was a poet, well known before the 1900s got going. Now, I actually have had this mixed up for years. There's a phrase that many of you may have heard, the Hound of Heaven. And I actually attributed that to C.S. Lewis, which got me looking, because I knew C.S. Lewis has a story about being pursued by God. But you know what? Francis Thompson invented the now famous expression, the Hound of Heaven. He wrote a poem called The Hound of Heaven. And I'm going to read you 2 excerpts from it. Because he spent a lonely and loveless childhood. He failed successively in attempts to become a Roman Catholic priest, and like his father, a doctor, and then a soldier. And where he ended up was addicted to opiates on the side of the Thames in London, lost and hopeless as a young man. But instead, Christian people came to him. And they shared with him about Christ. And they saw his talent for poetry. And they pulled that out of him. And before you knew it, he had come into a new place in life, putting his faith in Jesus Christ. And when he recounted what that was like in his life, he wrote this poem. Listen to how he starts it. I fled him down the nights and down the days. I fled him down the arches of the years. I fled him down the labyrinth ways of my own mind, and in the midst of tears. I hid from him, and under running laughter, up visted hopes I sped, and shot precipitated, adown titanic glooms of chasmed fears. But those strong feet that followed after. But with unhurrying chase and unperturbed pace, deliberate speed, majestic instancy, they beat, and a voice beat, more instant than the feet. All things betray thee who betrayest me. He heard the Lord pursuing. And there's 5 stanzas, I think, in this long poem, but when it comes to the end, he finally surrenders to the love of Christ. And Christ speaks to him and says, Alack, thou knowest not, how little worthy of any love thou art. Whom wilt thou find to love ignoble thee? Save me. Save only me. In every stanza we hear that footfall of this tremendous lover, in the words of another writer. Until finally the hunt is over and he says this, All which I took from thee I did but take, not for thy harms, but just that thou might seek it in my arms. Rise, clasp my hand, and come. The Hound of Heaven pursued and pursued until he said, Take my hand and come. All the things that you've gone through, you didn't know that I was doing it not to harm you, but just that you might seek what you need in my arms. Many others have experienced this. I mentioned C.S. Lewis. You might look at his book, Surprised by Joy. He talks about a variety of ways that he thinks of God's pursuit of him. He said it felt like a checkmate. I'm playing chess against the master of the universe, and move by move, I'm losing the game. He's moving in on me. He knows where I'm at until finally, checkmate. That's C.S. Lewis. So I ask, what's your story? If you're a believer, I ask you to recall that so that you can see in this passage God's loving pursuit of you. Now, perhaps some of you know about this because not that you've received it, but because you know the pounding of those feet. Because you're experiencing God's pursuit of your life. He's proven by sending His Son to be the ransom payment for your freedom. Now it's time to yield and come home with Him, to be restored to Him, to submit to His process of judgment and purification, and wait when He ultimately completes the story and we come in fear to the Lord and to His goodness. Perhaps today is the day you would finally yield your whole heart. So He's pursuing. The passage ends with promise. And the promise in Hosea is there. This is the third time, chapter 1, verses 10 and 11. It says, Yet the number of children shall be like the sand of the sea, which shall not be measured. And in the place where it was said to them, You are not my people, shall be said to them, Children of the living God. And then in chapter 2, verses 16 through 23, we talked about last week the hope of the promise that God is holding out. I will betroth you to myself in faithfulness and in righteousness and in justice and in steadfast love and in mercy. I will betroth you to me forever. The promise is there. And here in chapter 3, verse 5, He's saying, And after that time, the children shall return and they shall seek the Lord their God. And David their king. Oh, I wish I had time for that. David their king. David's dead. This is long past the days of David. There is a lingering promise in the Old Testament. Psalm 132:11 helps us know it. The Lord swore to David a sure oath from which He will not turn back. One of the sons of your body I will set on your throne. You see, here's the promise yet again to David. You know, in Luke 1:32, before Christ was born, the prophecy was said, He will be great and will be called the Son of the Most High, and the Lord God will give Him the throne of His father David, and He will reign over the house of Jacob forever, and of His kingdom there will be no end. So when it says they will come back to seek the Lord their God and David their king, it's saying they're going to seek Jesus, the Messiah. And they shall come in fear to the Lord and to His goodness. Fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom. It should be that we tremble at the thought of God Almighty. It should be that He makes us knock at the knees and shake in our boots. He made the universe. He is the God that called stars into existence. The nearest one would incinerate us if we got too close. He is God. Fear Him. But we're coming. Why are we coming closer and closer and closer to the God we fear? Because we're coming to the Lord and His goodness. And His goodness. You see, God is great and He is good. And in all of His bigness that dwarfs us and puts us in our place, it makes us know that we are expendable, and yet we're hearing His voice and we're drawn to Him. There are many things like this. The mountains call us. We love to go near. We love to see them, but they're dangerous. The mountains are dangerous. They'll get you. But we're still drawn to them out of the beauty that they are. The ocean is the same. In all its vastness, we go and we vacation there. We want to see it. And yet it's so filled with danger because it's too big and too strong for us. And so is our God. But we come to Him and we seek Him. And it says in the latter days, there's more yet coming. I'm going to end with this in the book of Hebrews. Because if there's more yet coming, we recognize perhaps we're in that same period in the church age of being purified through hard things and through judgment. Perhaps we can relate with Israel to say, during their exile, they had all these things taken away and God was doing something to purify them. I believe that it's at least fair to say it's similar, the times that we're living in. But this final piece of coming to the Lord and knowing Him in His goodness, that's for the later days. God has yet to do the full work of redemption. And so, that means we're living by faith. If it hasn't happened yet, if it's not complete yet, it means we're living by faith. And that's why we end up in Hebrews chapter 11. Faith is the assurance of things hoped for, the conviction of things not seen. By it, the people of old received their commendation. And then later, it says in verse 10, He was looking forward to the city that has foundations, whose designer and builder is God. Verse 13, these all died in faith, not having received the things promised. There was a promise to Abraham and Isaac and Jacob, and it continued. And God was going to do something. And that promise continues through Hosea. And He's saying, I'm still going to do something in the later days. And all of these of the Old Testament, they died not having received the things promised, but having seen them and greeted them from afar, and having acknowledged that they were strangers and exiles on the earth. For people who speak thus make it clear that they are seeking a homeland. Are you seeking that homeland? Are you waiting for that day? Are you preparing yourself? Are you being obedient to God as He does His work and says, go this way and that way, do these things, not those things? Are you doing the done version of obedience? Why? Because we're preparing for that day and we're waiting anxiously for it. Verse 39 and 40. And all these, though commended through their faith, did not receive what was promised, since God had provided something better for us, that apart from us they should not be made perfect. You see, God was waiting for us too. And then verse 1 of chapter 12, therefore, since we're surrounded by so great a cloud of witnesses, let us also lay aside every weight and sin which clings so closely, and let us run with endurance the race that's set out for us, looking unto Jesus, the founder and perfecter of our faith, who, for the joy that was set before Him, endured the cross, despising the shame, and is seated at the right hand of the throne of God. Verse 3 says, Consider Him who endured from sinners such hostility against Himself, so that you may not grow weary or faint-hearted. Don't grow weary. Don't grow faint. Consider the Lord. Consider the Lord Jesus and what He's done for you. Let's pray. Father, what better way could we have to enter into communion than with the thought of considering You? You who endured such hostility from sinners against Yourself. And as we set our eyes on You, we want the endurance to run the race. We want to not grow weary or faint-hearted. And so, God, we've looked at Hosea. We've tried to let that little chapter in those 5 verses tell us the stories of Your faithfulness, of Your pursuit and Your purification and the promise that we have to look forward to. Lord, I don't know if in these moments that's been done well or poorly, but I know that your word is in front of us, and so I hope in your word this morning, God. I hope that your word would call us to put our eyes on you and consider Jesus this morning. I hope that your word would call us to know the pursuit that you have of us. And if anyone is still waiting, still hiding, still running, that they would yield and turn in repentance and let you love them. Work in us, Lord. I pray it in Jesus' name. Amen.